Well, hello everyone. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here to help kick off Project Snapshot. I wanted to talk a little bit just about kind of my journey into advertising and marketing, tell you a little bit about We Are Next, which is the company that I started a few years ago. And but the bulk of this talk is about how to leverage what you've done in the past to get a job in advertising and marketing. Kind of no matter what you've done, we're going to show you that it is possible and to make it relevant and that it's actually super valuable, whatever you're bringing to the table. So let's get started. This is me. I worked about 10 years in advertising in the advertising agency world. I worked at three really great agencies, two of which still exist, Firstborn and Johannes Leonardo out in New York. I got to work with some really amazing clients and picked up some recognition along the way, which is always nice. But this is also me. I like to show this slide right after. This is me in 2008 when I graduated college. I went to UCLA and I was part of the National Student Advertising Competition team there, the Bruin ad team, which is a huge part of not only my college career, but it was basically the only sort of advertising and marketing training that I had coming out of school because UCLA didn't have an ad program. So if you're at a school where that's the case, I totally empathize. So when I graduated college, I really had kind of no idea what role was the right one for me in the advertising and marketing world. And so I struggled a little at the beginning because yeah, I just didn't know like how my skills would line up with the different roles. And so I started actually in account management and really quickly realized that strategy was where my heart lay and where, what got me really excited about advertising and really like how my brain actually works. So I, made the switch early on in my career. Getting into the industry in 2008 was tricky. I won't say it's the same as now because it's different, it's totally different world now. But there was a recession in 2008, which made jobs less available. So there was a lot of rejection early on for the few roles that were available. So it's part of everyone's journey. Everyone who's listening or who sees this eventually, you'll hear some no's along the way. But I like to think that rejections are just redirections. I told this to a couple of people the other day. So eventually you'll kind of look back on things that said no to you and realize that it led you to something really amazing that you can't even see right now. So anyways, lastly, I was really terrified to speak up in meetings when I started my career. And this is like a very common thing that a lot of interns talk about because you're so like young and you'd want to prove yourself and you're afraid of saying something stupid. And so it made me not want to speak up. But then all my bosses were like, we need to hear your ideas. We need you to share what you're thinking in order for you to actually do your job. Anyways, I share all this because I think behind anyone that you see in any industry that you want to work in eventually, you see all their accomplishments and like their titles. There's all this behind that for everyone. So I hope that makes anyone that you come across in the industry feel a little bit more approachable because no one goes through their career without these kind of little, not even hiccups, but just little aspects of your career journey along the way. When I was director of strategy at Firstborn in New York City, I started doing a lot of guest lecturing at schools around the country. And one thing I noticed was that a lot of students, no matter what kind of program they were at, they just were really confused and anxious and full of self-doubt about starting a career in advertising and marketing. And I think that it's one of those industries that it's just really hard to know what's what when you're on the outside looking in, and that's really scary. And so I used to get feedback from students after my talks, just like about how they're feeling or what they were thinking or what they thought of the talk. And this came back on one of them, and I've always kept it because I think it's just a perfect like depiction of what a lot of students do feel, and maybe even in high school too. Like there's a lot of things you don't know that you don't know yet. So that's really where We're Next, kind of the seed for We're Next started. So, the fact that advertising and marketing as an industry is like pretty competitive, it's fast paced, it's always changing. Like there's, whether it's, what companies exist out there, who owns which of company, what clients are working with which agency, types of media that advertising is using. It's always changing, and there are so many different pathways in. It's not like medicine. There's not, one very clear cut path to where you want to go or to get a certain title. And that can make it really daunting and confusing for people. And so students, and young talent, they feel that anxiety, that confusion, that self-doubt. And, at the time, there wasn't really anything out there like We're Next. There was a lot of things that were restricted to people in a certain area or a certain school, or you had to, apply and qualify for something, or you had to pay for the resource. And I just felt like there needed to be a resource that was open to everyone. And so that's really where We're Next, the origin of it, came from. Today, We're Next has kind of bloomed into a suite of resources. It started very much with the email newsletter that still goes out every Monday, just a small piece of written advice from the industry that goes out to everyone. The podcast and followed quickly after that, just more in-depth conversations with people on their career paths and how they got started and sort of the lessons they've learned along the way. Our job board is hugely popular. It is 24 jobs per week, and it's refreshed every week. So there's always something sort of new and kind of high quality and handpicked to apply for. Mentorship, Coffee at a Distance is our mentorship platform, is our program. It's a little different than other mentorship programs. It's not a one-on-one matching system. It's sort of more of an open pool of mentors that young talent can tap into and reach out to. We make it a lot easier to reach out to strangers, which I think is really scary when you're young. Events, of course, different talks. And lastly, our index is kind of one of the lesser known resources, but it's a really amazing database of other resources and tools that are free or low cost that students can take advantage of, because we think that everyone should know about other things that exist out there. So that's We're Next. I'll share a little bit of like the website and the social channels at the end of this, but yeah, so that's what I do full time now, run We're Next, with the help of my advisory board, of which Sebastian is a part. But anyways, that's me, that's my spiel in terms of what I do now. I really wanted to dive into this topic, leveraging your non-traditional experience to break into advertising and marketing. Like I said, there's so many different pathways in, and even though it's kind of scary, I actually think it's a really beautiful thing, because you end up with an industry with people of so many different backgrounds. And but I think sometimes where people struggle, it's not always easy to see the connection points between what you did in the past and what you want to do in the future. But having talked with like hundreds of people for the podcast and just in the industry in general, I can tell you firsthand that I believe full-heartedly that whatever you've done in the past, even if it's totally unrelated to advertising or marketing or like a specific skill or role that you're going for, everything can be made relevant and is valuable to what you're going to do in the future. You just have to know how to frame it. So that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to use actually past podcast guests and their specific stories and examples to show you very clearly how what they did in the past connects with what they do now, or what they do in the industry. And before I start, like one thing that I wanted to say was like, if you don't, a lot of people start in this industry feeling like they're behind because maybe they found, for those of you who out there who are, later on in your college career, maybe you found advertising and marketing later and didn't even realize that that's what you wanted to do till later. So maybe you don't have the internship experience that other people do, or if you're just starting out, like you just feel like there's so much that you don't know. But that's actually a wonderful thing. Like if we had companies full of the same type of people who went through the same type of schooling and did the same internships, you would get a lot of the same ideas, which is the totally opposite of what we want in such a creative industry. Again, I apologize for the banging in the background, but hopefully it's just like a good like percussion to what I'm saying. I just think that the true creativity comes from different people with different backgrounds, different experiences, coming together, different beliefs, coming together and like having their ideas like clash and mingle and mix together. That's where true creativity comes from. You can't all just be the same and agree with each other and then come up with the best ideas. It just does not work that way, and it's been proven time and time again. So really, it's what makes you different and what you might be lacking that actually might make you like a really valuable candidate for a company in the advertising and marketing world. So that's why I think this topic is so important, because we need people who don't have the typical backgrounds in order for this industry to really thrive. And one idea that I wanted to talk about before I get into the specific examples from the podcast guests is this idea of culture fit versus culture add. So, and I think this is, I mean, for any industry, but advertising and marketing specifically, I think back in the day, even, 5-10 years ago, when you asked people like who are hiring what they look for in candidates outside of like great skills and stuff like that, a lot of times you'd hear them say, oh, we're looking for a really great culture fit. Is this person a culture fit with our company? And the common phrase that everyone used back then is, oh, someone you could grab a beer with, and the idea is like someone you easily click with, almost like socially, like you just hit it off with them. You feel like you can talk to them really easily. You like them right away. That's great. Like we all want to love our coworkers and feel like we're friends right off the bat, but it's actually not the best in terms of creating the type of teams that get to good ideas, because if you're looking for culture fits, it means you're looking again for people who maybe have the same beliefs, have the same cultural background, like, went to the same type of school. You'll get the same type of people who just like kind of all agree with each other, and you won't get people who come in and challenge that and show different ways to approach problems. And so now the more popular way that people talk about hiring is, can we find someone who's a culture add? So how is this person and what they're bringing to the table as their personality, their beliefs, their experience, their values, how are they additive to our culture? How are they enhancing it in a way that's uniquely them? And this, again, it might not be someone who one looks like you, but thinks like you, or has the same beliefs, whether it's religious or political. Like we need everyone, together, like I said. So I think this is an important distinction, because if you go on an interview and you hear someone say they're looking for a cultural fit, I would be very wary, because again, like it's not really the thing that we should be looking for these days. It's that's the old idea. And then this new idea of culture add, I think, is a much healthier and more productive way to talk about hiring in advertising and marketing specifically. Okay, let's get to some examples. I'm going to blow through like 5, I think I have for you pretty quickly. And then I have like a tiny little interactive thing that I want to do after you've kind of gotten the gist of how we explain this. So these are all past podcast guests. A lot of them have moved on from the role that they are currently in, but this was their title at the time, in case you want to go back and listen to the episode or anything. But this first example is Alia Marder. She used to be the associate director at Philosophy, which is a design and UX digital studio out in Los Angeles. And on Alia's episode, she was talking about how she used to manage a wine bar. And she was explaining how that experience actually helped in her role as associate director. So one of the things that she talked about was understanding like consumer wants. So as this manager, sometimes she would play front of house, like at the bar, let's say, and she would have people come in looking for a specific wine. And she had to really learn how to listen to like, how does people describe what they're looking for, and kind of read between the lines. Cause like the average person doesn't really know what they're talking about when they describe the type of wine they want, unless they're like some sort of crazy wine expert. So she had to like develop this really keen ear for understanding like what people want. And that she used directly in her role, because like a lot of user experience is kind of listening to how people talk about, what they're looking for out of a digital experience or an advertising marketing experience, and then building that in a way that sort of meets those needs. She talked a lot about kind of organization, and like she was in charge of scheduling everyone, so she had to do almost like a lot of like project management in making sure that the wine bar was running smoothly, that the suppliers were getting her the shipments she needed on time in the right quantities, again, that people's schedules weren't getting all messed up. So she talked about that kind of like project management organizational level that really like taught her a lot about that, and that she used in her future role. And lastly, she talked about being able to remain calm under pressure, like working the wine bar during like a Mother's Day brunch rush or like a happy hour rush, and where everything is kind of chaotic. If you've ever worked in restaurants, in the service industry, like what I'm talking about, and needing to remain calm under that sort of very hectic pressure, which is something that we find in the advertising and marketing world all the time. Agencies can get very hectic. I know a lot of them aren't in office now, but still, like there are always fires to put out, and to remain kind of like calm and collected for everyone around you, I think is a really important skill to kind of foster. So anyways, Alia talked about these three things and how it kind of directly translated to some of the things that she did in the advertising world. And some of the things that she mentioned, I think also apply to anyone who has worked a job like in retail before. If you've folded clothes in a kind of a retail clothing environment before, you probably have some understanding of merchandising and like the flow, how people move through like in-store experiences. Again, I know like right now that's not that relevant because not a lot of people are going in store, but people will eventually. And or maybe you'll be able to understand like how people do in a post-COVID world. Like anyways, like anyone who's worked retail, service, like there are so many observations that we can pull from just watching people and the customers, and how they behave and how they act as they move through the space. And then this applies virtually too. I guess people wouldn't be like attendants in a virtual store, but I think like at the very least, like so many people out there have had like restaurant service, retail jobs. And I think so much of those experiences do translate if you sort of dig under the surface of what you did to get at the value of what exactly you were doing. This is another example. This is Chris Kwok. He's a senior strategist at BBHLA, so another LA agency. And he spent like 6 or 7 years in this like Christian rock band that he started. And they actually like got pretty big, they had a big like YouTube following, and like locally, I think they're really big. And they ended up touring like around the world for 6 or 7 years before he decided he wanted to go into advertising and marketing. And he's a strategist now, a senior strategist. And he talked in his episode about how that experience of traveling to different cities. Again, I realize that that's not like as relevant today, but I'm sure like you've traveled in the past, like travel will pick up eventually. But he was talking about how touring and going to different places and understanding kind of the cultural context in which he was playing. So you play the same show every night, but it's like slightly different because you're in a different country with, different beliefs and different customs, and having to understand that so that the experience translated is something that as a strategist, like we do all the time. Like, how do you translate this advertising or marketing experience so that it is most relevant or most resonant with whatever audience you're trying to serve, because every brand serves a different audience. And so that, and just that experience of traveling so much and having to do that for Chris was something that was a huge point of learning that he brought to his role as a strategist, and that he could speak to in his interviews. Chris actually said that like he used to be really like ashamed about what he did before, like he didn't want to bring it up in interviews, but then when he did start talking about it, he realized like one, how much it separated him from everyone else who just kind of went to school and didn't have like those years of doing something else. But also just like how much he was kind of steeped in kind of the cultural learnings and immersion that a lot of strategists experience, on the job. This is one of my favorite examples. This is Becca Nutt. She used to be the UX lead at Zambezi, and which is an agency, and she, before she got into advertising and marketing, she said like 200 productions. She starred in like 200 productions of Mamma Mia on Broadway, and this picture is not of her, but she was on Broadway and she was an actress, and she in her episode talked about how the idea of or the practice of auditioning really helped her in her career, because she had to go and put herself out there in rooms and build up resilience whenever she got rejected. I mean, as an actress, you get rejected so many times, and she just had to learn how. It taught her how to like have a thick skin, how to bounce back from, when people tell you no, as I talked about at the beginning. And again, in advertising and marketing, our ideas get killed all the time. We come up with great ideas. We work really hard on projects for months and months and months, and then maybe the client kills it at the last moment. That's a very common experience. And so Becca said that, auditioning really helped her prepare for that. And it made her really resilient in her career later on. She also talked about, the idea of like, if you do anything performative, like Chris did as well, from the band, you probably don't have any problem being in front of rooms, and not to say you're performing, but giving presentations is a performance in and of itself, a little different kind of performance. But again, it probably made you a little bit more comfortable in that public speaking aspect, which again, huge part of what we do. We're always presenting our ideas, whether it's internally to the clients. If that's something that you've done in the past, whether it's like speech and debate, or you did, plays, you did theater or drama when you were in school, all those things, like you can mine that aspect of like, I'm comfortable speaking in front of people. And that rejection aspect, I think is super, super interesting as well. But anyways, Becca, I always come back to this when people ask me about like people with backgrounds that were totally different than what they do today. This is Eric, who he used to be, he's no longer, but he used to be the senior engagement strategist at FCB Health. I think he's a director of strategy at Havas Health now. But Eric is very cool. Before he was, or as he was starting his career in advertising and marketing, he was a kind of commercial photographer for a while. He's a micro influencer, just, he used to go, brands would send him out on road trips, like, BMW or Mazda or what, like he'd went on a few, send him out on road trips to basically take amazing photos of the car. And so they could share it on social, which sounds like a dream job, right? Anyway, so he used to do that. And when he, started going to interviews, and as he started getting into the industry, he talked a lot about how you position a product in, this kind of photography, how you build an audience as a micro influencer on different social channels, and also, how to elicit that kind of like emotion from, these are photos of cars, but he also does like really beautiful portrait photography as well, and how to elicit that emotion from his subjects through the camera's lens. These are all things, again, that we do in the advertising and marketing industry in a different way. But, because he had this experience, he's able to speak to, how he uniquely does that, how he uniquely goes about doing these things. And so, again, if you have like a photography background, or you just like love taking photos, or you feel like you have a certain eye for something, or you create art in a certain way, again, it seems like it might be totally unrelated to what you're going to do in the future. And yes, you're not going to sit at a desk and like take photos or paint or whatever it is that you do, but your eye for like how you see the world, how your process and what you create, these are all things that are valuable to advertising and marketing, and that, again, like people really appreciate when you talk about these things in your interviews. All right, last example. This is Natalie Khan. She's the VP Strategy Director at Giant Spoon. I think that's still her title there. She's awesome. This is actually her boyfriend's example, but she, on the podcast, he gave her permission to use it. And she said that her boyfriend is a D&D, Dungeons and Dragons dungeon master. So for those of you who don't play Dungeons and Dragons, that is the person who sort of sets the gameplay, sets up the environment, kind of hosts these, Dungeons and Dragons games, and really comes up with like what is going to happen when, in response to like how people are, what the decisions that people are making in the game. Anyways, it involves a ton of planning, a ton of creativity, and seemingly couldn't be farther away from what you do in advertising and marketing. But if this person was at an interview, they could talk about how they create multi-sensory experiences for people, which in the world of experiential marketing is like so huge now. He can talk about how he's a master at improvisation and presentation. Again, like when we present and we improvise during presentations, like it's such a valuable skill to be able to pivot and respond to what your client is asking for. And someone who's been doing that as part of this gameplay would be very comfortable with something like that. And just I feel like the idea that you're creating this like whole other world in and of itself is like, it requires so much creative, and that storytelling aspect. We talk about storytelling so much in advertising. It's a huge kind of cornerstone of what we do. And so Dungeons and Dragons might sound like, oh, it's, really far away from advertising and marketing, but there's so many things, again, when you dig under the surface of what this person was actually doing and try to get at the value of what they are doing, that's really what translates. I mean, that's really how, again, we can take anything and sort of make it relevant to what we want to do in the future. And these are the kind of questions, I think, if you're thinking about something that you did in the past or something that you will do in the future. Again, like you might get a job, a part-time job that, just pays the bills. But if you can ask yourself these questions, it's really the way that you can kind of understand what the value is in what you're doing. So how does this inform my point of view? How does this inform like how I see the world? Again, that's such a big part of what we do in advertising and marketing. Does this give it, does it give me insight into a group or category? Do you understand a certain, let's say you volunteer at the Veterans Affairs Hospital, like in high school or something like that. You probably have firsthand knowledge of just that in healthcare environment, or people over a certain age, like that, kind of the senior citizen demographic, like, which is a target demographic for some brands. So you are coming with that very intimate knowledge of that specific group. Or maybe you are a babysitter for a group of moms in your neighborhood. Moms are like one of the biggest targets out there because they have like a lot of purchasing power, and you understand kind of the everyday experience of, a mom with 2 kids because you were in that environment. So these are the kind of things like we want to be asking ourselves. How does it build my soft skills? Soft skills are the skills that are things like communication, collaboration, anytime you're working with other people, like interpersonal communication skills, resilience we talked about is a soft skill, even though it's not soft at all. It's very hard, but to build resilience and bounce back when people tell us no. How does this build my hard skills? That one's a little bit more, one-to-one. If you're doing a design project that later you can, leverage those design skills. How does this inform my working style? Like how is what I do teaching me like how I like to work with other people or not work with other people? Everyone works a little bit differently, and coming to the table when you're interviewing with that understanding is really valuable, and being able to talk through that. And what do I care about as a person? Like where we invest our time, how we spend our time, and our skills says a lot about us as people and who we are outside of just like the skills and the things that we do. So, I don't think we should ignore the things that we put a lot of time in, even just from like a hobby perspective. This doesn't even just apply to, you know, past jobs or past internships. It can apply to the things that you spend a ton of time on just out like in your free time because you love doing that. Even those things, I think we can find little nuggets of value for, you know, again, what we want to do in the future. Okay, so I've done this in the past where like I've just asked like for an example. I think Sebastian has one queued up, but for an example of something that, like, now that we've gone through some examples, like an example of something that you spend a lot of time on, or a past job that you've had that you feel like is really unrelated to what you want to do in the future. And in the past, I've kind of like talked through the example. I don't know, Sebastian, if you want to share yours,
Do
or
you want to use me as a guinea pig? We can do
yeah, let's do that.
that.
Yeah.
So we're going Star Wars, right? For this, I can choose something else for too.
No, I mean, Star Wars is amazing.
So a little bit context about really how my career started for those watching now and those watching in the future is I there's a time in my life where I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and this was around 2015 when Star Wars: The Force Awakens was coming around, and Star Wars was becoming something cool to follow again. And I really wanted to get involved in my community, get back to my community, and research what was the best way to do that at the time. And that was with the 501st Legion, which is the world's largest costuming club, founded by a gentleman named Albert Johnson in 1996, and over the past 20 years became known to Lucasfilm and Disney as their preferred costuming organization. And over that period of time, the 501st had made a name for itself, a brand for itself. And I was really taken by the opportunity to tailor creativity in the sense of building film accurate costumes that we would build or commission from talented folks in our industry, and to tailor that towards charity, working with children in Make-A-Wish America, Children's Hospital, Ronald McDonald House, and a bunch of local organizations depending on wherever your garrison is based. And I had the opportunity to serve in two leadership roles. The 501st is running a really militaristic aspect, almost like a military, and first and locally as a garrison public relations officer that gave me my first experience being managing social media and working with events almost as an events coordinator, building those relationships professionally. Then I got to step up to the Legion level, the international level, and work with Lucasfilm and Disney. That started my interest in public relations to where we are today.
So, I mean, so many things, like, I mean, you talked about some of the things that led directly to kind of even
Yeah.
like that sort of opened your eyes to certain aspects of like the advertising and marketing industry as a pathway, but even kind of like that initial like hard skills, like learning how to manage social media and stuff like that.
I think it was like something I've been thinking about during this presentation was like the soft skills aspect of it too,
Mm-hmm.
because I was one. I'm still one of the youngest people in our garrison, and it gave me the opportunity to work with people, to work with children, to people who are in their 50s professionally, and that communication is something that is so important later on in life, and even in the sense of sensory, with being able to when we're in costume, we're not supposed to we're supposed to represent the character, and that really representing that side of yourself helps you. So I realized that it started my sense of being able to follow throughout the room, to be able to understand what people want to see, and that's really translated to my work as eventually a project manager or a communications manager.
You know, I think that's a really great example. And even just the idea of like stepping into a character's shoes, like again, like certain aspects of this industry is really like putting your mindset in the mindset of someone else, because we're not creating advertising for ourselves. We're not always marketing to ourselves. We're marketing to someone else out there who is probably very different than us in a lot of cases. And so that's a huge like exercise that we have to do, and we do research and surveys and like interviews and stuff to be able to understand that. So I think like you said, stepping into that persona of the character, and also what you said about working with people at different ages and being able to switch your communication style in order to best get what you need out of the conversations, or like make people understand what you're thinking. Again, like totally translatable. We do that all the time in the industry. Really, anyone who's worked with anyone else, I mean, we rarely work on things like in an isolated solo environment, so anyone can really say that that kind of cross team collaboration, communication, that is something that we are continually like learning how to do and getting experiencing in pretty much like any job or project that we've worked on in the past. So again, these are all things that we can kind of bring with us and use when we're when it gets time to apply for a job or start looking into potential jobs. Last, I just wanted to close with kind of like, went through a bunch of examples, but like, where do you bring these up? Like, this is a question I get a lot. So how do I really talk about my like non-traditional experience? On your resume, if you applied and were chosen for something, so if you were, if it was like a program or a fellowship that you had to apply and kind of compete to get in, and you got in, I think it's worth putting on a resume, because again, that says something about you, that you were chosen. Or if you spent at least 6 months on it. So if you had like a side project that or like you had a part-time job, but you only worked there for like a couple months, that's not something I would put on my resume per se, unless there was like a huge like end thing that you could kind of point to, like a huge, I don't know, event that you put together, or some sort of big report that you like were working on, that you kind of need that endpoint. Otherwise, I would say like at least 6+ months if it's gonna take up room on your resume, since we want our resumes to be 1 page max, and we don't want to be too cluttered. So we have to be like really considered about what we're putting on our resume to kind of put the strongest foot forward. In your portfolio, if you have a portfolio in the future, again, if there's something tangible to show. So if you don't have to be creative to have a portfolio. You can have a portfolio as a strategist or whatever, any role that you want, having some sort of place online. I guess people really don't have physical portfolios anymore, but you could, I guess. But most people, they have, personal websites where their work is. Again, if there's something tangible to show, whether it's like something you created, or again, some numbers around results of whatever, like how whatever you created had some sort of impact in the world. Those are things I think you can include in a portfolio or a website. And then in interviews, this is, I think, where it gets really fun, where I think people are too hesitant to talk about these things in the past that we've done, especially if you're coming to the table with like not as much experience as others. I think we tend to come off as like, oh, apologetic for like the fact that we're not as experienced as maybe the next person. But I think really being proud and owning the things that you've done in the past, and especially those things that like you are really passionate about. I mean, Sebastian was talking about Star Wars, but any of the other, like the Dungeon and Dragons example, like imagine if this person was talking in an interview and explaining, everything that I said about like how being a Dungeons master has like taught him these different skills. Like he would probably like light up a little bit when he talks about D&D. It's like just because it's something that he loves and spent so much just of his like natural like time on. He voluntarily spent like 10 years on becoming a great D&D dungeon master. So I really think like just kind of I think the next slide says own. Oh no, how to connect the dots, sorry. I have a slide and a couple slides that's like really just like own the things that make you different, and that you're pouring your energy into, because I think that's really how people see who you are in an interview versus just like what you've done. How to connect the dots. One of the biggest mistakes that I see on resumes is that people, and this is not even just with experience that is like unrelated, even when it's related experience, I think people focus too much on just like what they did. Like they'll say like, oh, I did this, I did X, I did Y, I did Z. but they don't say how it relates to the role that they're trying to get. So if you are, if you did have a job in like a totally different industry, you wouldn't just say like, oh, I was a barista, I made lattes, I like cleaned the bathrooms, and I, like closed up for the night or whatever. Like, you wouldn't just say that, because obviously you're not going to be doing that in your new role. You would say all those things that, like, Alia said, like, I learned how to, I stayed calm in high pressure situations, and kept everyone like on track to like meet their goals, or whatever it is that you want to say. Like, you need to connect how what you did will be valuable to the role that you're trying to get, because the person who's interviewing you might not make the connection, like right, like from on the surface. You have to be the one to kind of frame what you did in the right way. And then be specific about what part you owned. So relates to like if you were part of like a group project, or like kind of a bigger organization that created something. Like, be specific about what part you owned, because that's really what someone who's interviewing you is going to want to know, unless you really did like the whole thing or the whole project all by yourself. But yeah, being specific about that I think is really important, because they want to know like what kind of not only skills you're bringing to the table, but kind of what aspect of projects like might you be best suited for. Oh, this is the slide I was talking about. Like, again, I bring in this picture back because I really think that owning what makes you different is so important. And it's funny, Sebastian, I was just thinking about it. Like, this deck is from a different talk I did like a while ago, and like this picture was already in there, so this was not a reference to Sebastian's love of Star Wars, but just happens to work. No, but really, like, owning what makes you different, I think we need more of that in this industry. It's the only thing that's going to lead to the best ideas. And so I think let's stop being apologetic for what we're not bringing to the table, and start really owning and celebrating what we are bringing to the table, no matter where it came from. This is We're Next. This is our website. All of our resources are there. You can access everything. It's all open for everyone. And this is where you can connect with me. It's mostly We're Next, but I do check those channels still personally. So, but thank you, Project Snapshot team, for having me. This was really fun to be able to bring some of these specific examples. I just think it's such an important topic, because again, like, it's not obvious how to make these things relevant, but they are relevant. So I want people to not miss out on leveraging what they've done in the past. So thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. And if you all have any questions, now would be time to drop them in the chat. But since Jonathan already asked one, I feel like it'd be interesting to take this from the perspective of in the past with the different, like, because this is a more general question, if you can go about like the different tracks between strategy, creative direction, project management. Jonathan Dalu asks, my question for you is, what technical skills are needed in the marketing and advertising industry? Any specific kind of software or community programs we must have the know-how of?
Yeah. So yeah, you're right in terms of it's very specific to the role that you want to play. So it might be hard to answer this for everyone. I will say that there are certain roles that do not require any technical hard skills. So account management and strategy, project management to a certain extent. I mean, there might be like project management software that you would have to learn, but let's group the three of those together. So account management, strategy, and let's say project management for the sake of it. Those are all roles that do not require any technical or like specific programs or hard skills. I mean, if there are like certain tasks, like for example, for strategy, writing a creative brief, but it's something that you learn on the job. It's not something that you need to, like, there's no class out there, like, online tutorial that teaches you how to write a creative brief. It's definitely not rocket science. It's definitely not something that you have to pour a lot of resources into to learn, which is sort of the beauty of those three roles, that like they really can come from any industry, because it doesn't require that those, any programs or those skills. Now, if you're talking about like becoming a creative, I mean, most creatives if they are art directors or designers will need to know Photoshop and Illustrator, kind of the Adobe Creative Suite, like getting really familiar with that. And that's pretty standard for people to know. If you're a copywriter, not so much on the creative side, you know, your pen or your keyboard is your the only thing that you really need to know and love. It's nice though. I mean, if there was a copywriter who had design skills, that would make you even more dangerous, I think, as a candidate if you're interviewing. Certainly, if you were where you see a lot of programs and you know, technical skills are things like if you went into like data strategy or analytics, there are a lot of like programs like there are a lot of coding languages and stuff like that that you start to have some knowledge of. And same thing with like media planning and media buying. There are some certificates online. I think through Google, I mean, like Google has one, like Facebook, there's like for each different platform, they have like a certificate for like media buying or media planning for that specific one. So those are all things that you don't necessarily need to have done before you start applying. I mean, sometimes it's nice, but a lot of companies will actually, like when you're starting out, will pay for you to go through those certifications because it'll help you do your job. Same thing, social media management. I mean, there are like a lot of tools out there, like Hootsuite, Crimson Hexagon. They're all like listening and measurement tools, like specifically around social, that are good to get familiar with. But again, a lot of these things like require you to like pay a ton of money to get access. So a lot of them end up like being provided to you on the job to kind of like start playing around with and start getting familiar with. So I guess overall to say, outside of like if you're trying to be a creative and you need to know like Adobe Creative Suite, there aren't a ton of like technical programs that you would need to like are like must have to like get a job in this industry, which again is kind of the beauty of it, because that's why people come from so many places, like versus medicine where it's like you have to go to med school in order to be a doctor. Like there's no question about that. It's totally different in the ad world.
Yeah, I actually had a question about your experience. Earlier you mentioned about your internship and you started out with like not speaking up as like being, your managers wanting you to speak up more to share your experiences. And I actually have that going through right now with my current internship. And I feel like my manager and my VP are really trying to like push me to do more, even though like it's hard for me to get over that barrier of like they're higher up than me and I'm just an intern. How did you kind of like get over that struggle?
Yeah, so a couple different ways. It took a really long time, honestly. But one of the things that kept repeating in my head was, especially because I was you know, when you're in especially strategy, like a role like strategy, and you're starting out, like really the value that you're bringing to the table is your thought, what you're thinking. Like that's really the value that you're bringing. And so, you know, some of the feedback I started getting was like thinking about not speaking up. If I'm not speaking up enough, like I'm not actually doing my job, which is of course like you never want to hear that you're not doing your job, but like I mean, it was kind of the reality for me. So I kind of had to keep repeating that in my head, that like it wasn't, because in my head I was like, oh, it's enough that I'm, you know, a quiet observer, that I'm like taking really good notes and like, but if it's all like up in here and you're not sharing it or articulating it, it yeah, you're really only doing half of your job. And the thing that really helped me too is understanding that like you don't have to open your mouth and say something totally brilliant. Like half ideas, a quarter of an idea is or half formed thought, those are valuable too, because you never know, like someone might pick that up and build on it and it becomes another idea. So even sharing things that like you know, you're not even sure if it's, I mean, there's no right answer is also kind of the learning I think that many people come to, especially in advertising and marketing. It's so subjective. So like there is no right answer. And so there's really no way that you can open your mouth and say something that someone would be like, oh, that's wrong, you know, which I think is the fear, right? So understanding that even if you like pose it as a question, like what maybe like is there something in this? And then you say like a half idea, and then someone would be like, oh, that's really interesting, I hadn't thought about that way. Maybe if we think about it like this, like it you don't have to have something like fully formed in order to speak up. And that I think really helped me, because like in my head I would like wait and like be thinking through like what I wanted to say before I wanted to say it, and then the moment would have passed and I'd be like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to say it. But if I had just opened my mouth and said kind of like a half thought, it just would have been just as valuable. I think it's more valuable to like open your mouth and say something than not. It just comes with, it comes with practice too. So have patience with yourself. It's nice that your managers are trying to push you. And I also found that talking about what I wanted to like say in like a meeting ahead of time with someone like in a smaller environment. So maybe you talk with your manager like about an upcoming meeting and talk about like what you've prepared for it, or like what you think about the project that you're going into the meeting for. It just helps kind of like warm you up a little bit, because it's not the first time you have like said those things. And then the other person also goes into the meeting knowing what you want to say and can kind of help be an ally in that sense, and be like, oh, Elaine was telling me about this, what she found earlier. Like, Elaine, do you, maybe want to share with the group? And that's a really nice way too to kind of learn how to break into conversations, because that's also hard when like everyone has like really big personalities and are really loud.
Yeah, thank you. My manager was saying that she wants me to get the jitters out before I get a full-time job where I can like speak up whenever I want to. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you'll totally get there. So many people go through this. It's very, very, very common and totally natural. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Natalie. My name is Kevin, and I had a quick question.
Hi.
I know it's like not super related to like the field that you're in, but just a general question.
Yeah.
Like, do you have any tips for younger people who kind of are confused about their career direction and don't really like know what they're passionate about, but like are kind of scared to like go outside and try new things just because they think like since they've never tried it before that they might be behind compared to their peers? And like I know you talked a lot about like the people that you knew, how they had like passion projects and how that contributed to like fields that they found later on. Like maybe if you had some advice for that.
Yeah. How young are we talking?
Well, like college, I guess.
Okay, college level.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So yeah. So very relatable problem. There are so many people out there who it takes a little bit of time to figure out kind of what you want to do, and that's again totally okay. I think part of it is paying attention to the things that you're like naturally drawn to. I think so many times we think about like, oh, I have to think about what I want to do professionally. So I have to think of like a specific industry or like a role that like already exists that, that I can like aim for. But sometimes we can get like little hints of what that might be in just like looking at where we're spending our time, whether it's like I spend a ton of time like gaming, or like I really like get lost like watching a very specific type of movie, or I don't know, like I volunteer my time to like help other people. Like there's certain like just starting to pay attention, and even if you haven't done those things in the past, just like moving forward, like pay attention to like where you're choosing to use your time, and when the times when your emotions kind of like spike either positively or negatively. So like next time you like feel like, oh my gosh, this is awesome, like I love like what I'm doing right now, like pay attention to that. And also pay attention to the times when you're like, this is super shitty, like I do not want to like do what I'm doing right now. And it'll start to give you an idea of like the qualities or characteristics of the what you might want to do in the future. And I often think that's a more productive way, and it keeps you kind of like more open than being like, okay, like medicine, doctor, or like these like very straight paths that we kind of put ourselves on. Because I think that's when we get scared, because like when you're on the medicine path, it's like, okay, it's really hard to get off this train now, like it's going and I'm spending all this time. But if you kind of like instead use that the approach of just paying attention to the things that kind of naturally get you excited, and also the things that you're like naturally good at, like it's kind of hard to tell when you're young because like you don't have a comparison, but there are probably some things that you do that you don't even realize like are actually like really impressive to other people. Like other people can't do what you do. And just starting to pay attention to those things and keeping yourselves open, honestly, in college is sort of the best way to find it. And I think if you do that, then it gives you permission to like try a bunch of different things, because really now is the time to be trying. Like in a college environment, like there's pretty low risk in trying stuff out. So if you tried an internship one summer in one industry and you realize not really for me, great. Like now you can like cross that off the list and kind of like pivot to like, it'll hopefully show you like get you a little bit closer to like what is really interesting to you. So really like now's it's not too late to try different things, and now is kind of really the time. And even after you graduate, honestly, like especially these days, like you'll have time to kind of feel things out. But I always really encourage people to not feel like they have to put themselves on one track and then just be like caught in that. Because again, like from this presentation, you know now that like what you do, and if you spend a summer doing something like you don't end up going that route, it's not going to be a waste. There will be things that you're going to take, whether it's directionally or like actual skills and learnings that you're going to take into what you actually end up wanting to do. Yeah, and then in terms of side projects, like again, like pay attention to things that are interesting to you. It's nice to think of ways to like create something around what you love to do. So like, for example, the gaming example. So like a ton of people are gamers, they love gaming. I'm not making assumptions about you. I'm just saying in general, like, or like maybe someone loves like esports. They love watching Twitch and, other people playing. Maybe you start like a blog that just like is commentary on Twitch battles or whatever, like or big tournaments, like observations of like almost like like they have like sports broadcasters, like becoming a commentator on esports or something like that in your own time. Just finding ways to like create something out of things that you really enjoy doing. That's all a side project is. It honestly doesn't have to be something that's like directly related to whatever industry you want to go into. It's really just something that like you find really interesting that you want to create something out of. So that's the way I would think about it if I was in your shoes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
A question from Ryan. My question relates to back when you mentioned how a shift in culture ad is a really positive thing. Do you have any examples of how to leverage this in team dynamics with a new group of people?
Part of it is, if I'm understanding the question correctly, part of it is feeling like people talk a lot about bringing your whole self to work. Obviously, I think we need to find spaces and employers and companies where we feel safe doing that, because I would never ask someone to like bring their whole self to work if they didn't feel safe doing that. But if you are, and this is something that like I think when we do like interviews and stuff like that, we have to really ask the hard questions so that we understand what kind of space we're walking into, especially as if you're a person of color or you have a disability or whatever it is. And then but if you are in a place where you feel like, okay, I feel supported, I think this is a healthy, good environment, bringing in aspects of yourself that aren't directly related to work. So like not being afraid to talk about the fact that you love XYZ, or that you are obsessed with, a certain TV show or whatever it is that you do outside of work. I think being able to share that with your coworkers and understand, like bringing other aspects, other facets of yourself to the office, I think that's how that culture ad, and sharing your perspective, whether it's like a cultural thing and being able to speak up to represent kind of like where you come from or the people that are like you. I think that's how we start seeing value from like being a culture ad, because if we're different from all our coworkers, but we go into an environment and then feel, whether it's self-imposed or like externally imposed, we feel like, oh, I just have to like kind of blend in, like I have to be like everyone else so that I get along with everyone. That's when like you're trying to be a culture fit, like we talked about before. So yeah, it's not the easiest thing, is again, especially if you're in an environment where like it's not super comfortable to be different, but hopefully again, you've kind of investigated that in kind of the interview process. But yeah, I think a lot of it is just not being afraid to share your perspective, even if it's different from other people's, and not being afraid to again share those other sides of yourself that don't necessarily relate to the work that you're doing right now.
Any more questions? Last calls?
Those were good questions.
No, thank you so much, Natalie.
Cool.
Really,
Yeah.
really enjoyed this.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you for having me. My pleasure. And yeah, thanks for the invite. Hopefully it was helpful. Yeah, you were on mute. So I was like, I don't know if he's talking to me or not. No, I guess I'll just say, go to we-r-next.com, because there are a lot of resources there to help you along the way. I think it is helpful. I mean, for those who are interested in advertising and marketing, even if just like an inkling, like maybe this might be interesting, there's a lot of content on there, whether it's the podcast or any of the like archived newsletters or articles. Like there's a ton of stuff on there to hopefully directionally show you what this world is about. So yeah, I just invite everyone to check it out and to know that everything is going to be okay. That's what I've been telling everyone lately. This year has just been such a bear, but I'm very optimistic that the good news is you ultimately will determine the outcome of this year, not this year. 2020 ain't got nothing on like you. So that's all I have to say.